Hey y'all, it's David Ducker coming back at you, and today I'm going to be comparing and contrasting two different styles of play. On the one hand, we're going to talk about simulationism, the simulationist style. On the other hand, we have the narrativist style. It's getting me tongue-tied just thinking about it. So let's contrast those two. Now this is very much in the vein of the railroad versus the sandbox, but it's a little bit different. You see, the sandbox and the railroad, that's kind of a style of play, and it's a style of everyone interacting. Whereas the simulationist versus the narrativist, those two differences are more about the GM and what he imposes. So they overlap to a large degree, but I think there's a fair bit of difference between them as well. And while the sandbox and the railroad, that's a play style. That's how you experience it. That's what you do, what you're able to do as a player. Whereas again, I think simulationist and narrativist, that they are distinct in that's what the GM's imposing. That's the story. That's the story that the game is going to be about. How you're going to tell that or discover that. So let's contrast the two styles. And I'm going to use video games as an example because it's a great example. Well, it's a very strong example. So let's talk about narrativist, because that's the easiest one. That's your railroad. Narrativist is what Andrew Wood might call the frustrated writer, where the narrativist will write a story, and he'll have all his people, his places, his things, his 3-act structure, his twist ending, all that good stuff. He'll write that and then walk you through it point by point. So it's very, very well suited to a railroad, but it doesn't have to be a railroad. You can run a sandbox like that too. This would be a narrativist sandbox would be, okay, I've got my main events that are going to happen. And they're going to happen no matter what the PCs do or they don't do. So you can go anywhere, but on October 31st, it's going to be Halloween. And you'll become your costume. And, we'll go through these events on a calendar. They're going to happen. They're going to tell a story. That's a narrative that I am imposing onto the players and onto the game. So narrativist is the writing skill. Now to contrast that, simulationist. Oh, and let's actually go back one step and say, for a video game example, there's a huge number of video games that are narrativist. Most video games are narrativists. They have a story, they walk you through it. Legend of Zelda, for example, the princess comes to you for help, you hit a dungeon, you come back, she gets kidnapped, then you go and try to rescue her, or you power up so you can rescue her. So that's a narrative, and no matter what you do, that's going to be the story imposed. Even if you wander far and wide, off plot, on plot, side quests, but that's the narrative. That's the narrative arc. And indeed, each side quest will have its own narrative arc as well in that style of game. So now let's contrast. Now let's move forward to simulationism. Simulationism is your sandbox. It's where you have an area, and it's populated with people, and it's highly detailed. And these people form factions, and they have relationships with each other. So there is no story. There are lots of elements to a story, lots of elements that could be introduced into a story, but there's no story that's been imposed. I don't have a calendar of events, and I don't know what's going to happen ahead of time. There's all these great elements, but we're going completely sandbox style in that I don't impose anything. That would be the simulationist style. And the story is entirely player driven. It's whatever your players do, that's going to be the story. Whatever they interact with, that's going to be the story. And you find the story. So the setting tells you the story instead of you imposing the story out onto the setting. And a video game example, this is going to be The Sims, or a lot of real-time strategy games, any kind of simulation game where you build things and they interact. That's going to be your simulationist style. Because let's go back again. Legend of Zelda, you can play through, and each playthrough, if I beat it and then I play it again, it's going to be pretty similar to the last time. Whereas The Sims, every time it's going to be completely different because it's self-generated. It generates a story. The writers have nothing to do with what happens. Or if you're playing Civilization, it's randomly generated environment, and then you're thrown in, and you have all these different randomly generated elements to interact with. So there's the geography is different, the people are different, and the writers, there aren't really any writers. The story of the game just happens naturalistically, and it's a simulationist style. So you get this huge replay value, and you don't have to do any writing. You have to do a lot of creating and world building, but you don't have to do any writing. And writing is a huge cause of GM burnout, and it could be player burnout too. So generally, I prefer simulationism because I have to do less work. I have to make elements and throw them in, but after that, I don't really have to do much writing. So it's easier for me because the story will reveal itself. The story is already somewhere out there, and we just need to find it. Now, the other skill it requires, besides all that creation, is the management of the story as it unfolds. To take these, what could be almost random events and forge them into that 3-act structure on the fly. To have the inciting incident, to recognize it, and to see where the end is, or what you think the end is, or where the players are going to drive it, and build that up and build it up, like your try-fail cycles, your rising action till you hit that climax, and then knowing when to say the end. So it's a different skill set. That's the difficulty, is on the fly getting all of that, and after each session saying, how does it fit into this 3-act structure? So that's simulationism. And of course, the benefits of narrativism are you can hit it with a time scale. You can say, oh, I've only got 4 sessions, and then Bob is moving to Florida. So I need to hit, beginning, middle, and end in 4 sessions. So Narrativist, that's the way to go right there. Or if you have a really good plot that you've written, and you can run them through that, and it may indeed, if you're a good writer, it may indeed be better than something that's revealed itself. So there's a lot more work in terms of crafting the narrative in that narrativist style. And that's a very difficult thing to do, is keep these stories pumping out and keep them flowing out. Whereas Simulationist, there's a lot of work building all the elements, building your sandbox and your world. That can be a lot of work. Now, you could use a random generator or 10 random generators, and you got your random NPCs, your random geography, your random factions, your random histories, and you just have to edit them together. So that's a lot of upfront work, but going forward, day to day, session to session, there's less work in general. So that's going to be my contrast of simulationist versus narrativist. I generally prefer simulationist, but of course we're always going to have some kind of hybrid style. We're going to have some kind of narrative imposed. From day one, I do. And that also can make it easier, but I'm certainly way far into the camp of simulationist instead of into narrativist. So that's my ramble on contrasting the two styles. Let me know what you think. Let me know which style you fall into. and let me know which style you have more fun with as a player, as a GM. So I do want to thank you for tuning in today, and I wish you good day and good gaming. Cheers.